Hello and welcome to a new episode of Lowdown. Today I'm delighted to be joined by RHYS to speak about the role of an individual development coach. RHYS, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Connor. Thanks for the invite to get involved. I'm looking forward to having a good chat today.
RHYS, I suppose where do we begin? How did you manage to cultivate this obsession for football growing up?
I think I was just drawn to it, mate. To be honest, you can't really help it, can you? What you're drawn to? It's the best toy in the world of football, isn't it? You can have hours of fun with it, and you can do it on your own with mates, whatever. So yeah, everything was just born from the love of the game, and I think even to this day, with how I try and work as a coach in my kind of field and area, everything ties into the game. There's nothing more important than the game and the football. So yeah, just grew up loving it. Grew up playing all the time. I was an only child, so I was in the garden all the time, playing by myself. As you get a bit older, then you're going out, you're playing with your mates, your school team, your kind of district, a little bit of academy stuff then, and then yeah, it's the best thing in the world. It's something I'm really passionate about. So and I've got two young lads of my own now, and they're just at the start of their journey, and it's brilliant to watch them getting as much enjoyment out of it as well.
And I suppose you began your professional career, let's say, in the realm of sports science, but finding that niche working on individual development. I mean, previously having headed up sports science departments and clubs, being on the outside, I mean, having that ability to reflect, did that perhaps help you identify any blind spots from coaches' session plans?
Possibly, I think, and to touch on the point I just made there, mate, is everything relates to the game. So I was always the first person to say, even when I was just in the sports science realm, if you pick me up and threw me into cricket or rugby or any other sport, I don't think I'd be strong or effective. Now you're probably talking yourself out of a load of jobs there, but I wouldn't want to work in another sport. The reason why I say that is I think you have to understand the game. So you put your sports science hat on. One of the first things people think about is the distances and high speed running and things like that, and reports you get from training in games. And I always have felt that without any real context or understanding of the game or what the demands the coach is putting on the players will get this type of response physically. If you don't understand that, how can you condition them for that? I couldn't go and get an ice hockey team fit because I don't understand the game enough to go and get them fit for what the purpose for trying to get them fit for. So it was always the context of the game that I thought was important. And I think my background as a player, by no means a top player, but I've played the game a little bit and had coaching badges at the start of my kind of career in professional football. I think that helped me a little bit. And like I say, it was always the game that drew me in. I wanted to work in football. So you're always looking at how certain positions move, what type of physical responses they've got in that. If you're playing a low block 4-4-2, what does your physical output look like for a fullback? Be very different to two wing backs in a high pressing team, for example. So I think once you're looking at that, you're starting to look at the real detail of how that person plays, and that's probably then led a little bit to the individual side. So coaching was always my main passion and what I wanted to do. Sports science was a fantastic kind of entry for me to be able to do that, I guess. But I like to think that's a little bit of a unique selling point for me now that I've got a decent understanding of both, and I've been lucky to work with some top managers as well. So being in the rooms when we're doing opposition analysis and tactical meetings about how we're going to beat certain oppositions, how we're going to break them down, how does that affect the individual and the unit in terms of pressing triggers and body shapes and all that kind of detail. So it's something I've always found fascinating, and I love kind of designing sessions as well, whether it be individual, smaller groups or team sessions. That's probably one of the things I enjoy the most. So, how do we want to play? What are we trying to teach? And how can we design something that can help our players develop in that? So that's probably one of my most passionate parts of the job now.
I'm curious though, it's nearly as much as a paradox, if anything, when you say it's context dependent, so to speak. And it really is, and you have to have that feel for the game. But that ability to think critically too, that's something you would have gained from, I mean, your work in academics, that ability to question things. I suppose in football, what I'm most curious about is why is there a culture of being afraid to try new things? I mean, you look at sports such as the NFL, you look at a quarterback, you'll have anything from an S&C coach to a footwork coach. the handling coach. I mean, having just vacated your role now at Sheffield United, I mean, have you any plans going forward to look and incorporate teachings from perhaps any other sports or different industries, Rhys?
Certainly not other sports, if I'm totally honest, and that might be silly to put out into the public domain when I'm sat here not working at this moment in time. But like I say, football is what my passion is, and that's what I love, and that's what I want to be involved in. I think that in terms of other projects, there's a couple of things at the moment, but nothing that's really kind of gripped me and thought, yeah, that's really, really what I want to do. I think that specialist coaching will perhaps be the way forwards. You mentioned the NFL, and just look at their kind of coaching staffs and the real kind of detail that the players get. I certainly see football starting to go that way. I think traditionally, perhaps no. I think when I was a young kind of player trying to just come into senior football, the term, oh, he's busy. And you look back and I hate that term. And I've even heard it as a coach, but I think that's leaving the game now. I think that the introduction of the EPPP, where young academy players get a lot more kind of care and attention in their development now throughout their journey. Those players are now becoming senior players, so they expect that care and attention when they get to the first team. Just because they're now a first team player doesn't mean that they stop learning, doesn't mean that they still haven't got things to learn. You know, in fact, they probably need to learn even more to get the levels. So I do think that specialist coaching will come in, except in football that you have a goalkeeper coach. So why don't you have a midfielders coach? Why don't you have a strikers coach? We've always accepted the goalies need to access a specialist position. Well, so's being a striker, so's being a defender. It's still specialist. There's still requirements that you need to know and need to learn. So I do think that individual kind of care and detail certainly seen it start to grow, and I think it'll only continue to go that way.
Football, of course, really is an infinite game, and I suppose when we speak about success, it really is hard to define as much as, you know, it is very much a subjective term. But reflecting upon being at Sheffield United, I mean, you look at the academy system there. No other club in the UK has as many academy graduates in the current England setup than Sheffield United. You have Aaron Ramsdale, Kyle Walker, Harry Maguire, and Dominic Calvert-Lewin. I mean, last season, debuts were handed out to Daniel Jevison, Antoine Hackford, and many others. What was so special and unique about that environment there?
It'd be very difficult for me to talk about, the senior England players that you've mentioned there, because that was before my time. But I can certainly comment on the kind of young ones that have come through now. I think that best throughs the manager there, and Jack was the guy, my opportunity to come back as well. The environment that he's created in there is outstanding for not learning the real, but also mentality and driving standards each and every day for these players. You know, to get a top career and to get everything out of yourself to play at the higher levels, you can't take too many days off through your career, and that's really driven into the young players there. And you certainly see development. So when you want real intensity in your sessions, you want people pressing properly and with aggression. You're speeding up the team with the ball, then you're speeding up their decision making, you're speeding up the pictures that they have to take all the time. Then once they're getting better at making good decisions quicker, they need to be able to execute whatever it is they want to do, pass, shoot, tackle, whatever it is, and have a good kind of succession output with that. And I think that the environment and the culture that they've got there is outstanding. It's a pleasure to be a part of. Paul Eckenbottom takes the 23s, and Ecky's obviously very experienced manager in his own right, has worked in the Championship and obviously went in as interim at the end of the season. You've got Derek Geary, who does the 18s, drives intensity every day and has fantastic relationships with his players. And there's loads of staff around that. So that there's real detail given to individuals in whatever stage of their development they're at coming through the academy. But there's also real drive, intensity, and mentality for the teams as well. And I think, we've certainly seen some good development with the players, and I'm sure that will continue to happen.
And it's a hallmark of a good academy too, Rhys, isn't it? When you have those traditional values that aren't lost. But Sheffield United, they weren't afraid to innovate either. I've read recent reports too about their use of neuroscience in the development process. Could you elaborate a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to elaborate too much because my understanding of it isn't fantastic. I was learning, and it's something that fascinates me, and I still need to to learn more on it. But we brought in a lady called Sally Needham from the FA, and she really opened a lot of coaches' eyes in terms of, you know, your language or your softer skills, which we all know is important. But it was brilliant and fascinating to have her there to kind of prod you and kind of point you in certain directions. Not forcefully, never forcefully. If you wanted to learn something, though, she was always there and she could guide you with your learning on that. So that was fantastic. And like you say, it's sometimes thinking outside of the box, in terms, you know, what are we missing? What can we add? How can we make things a little bit better? Perhaps somebody else isn't doing. And yeah, that I think that side of things will only continue to grow. I've had some really fascinating chats with Sally over the last year of kind of working with her, and she's very good at what she does, and the stuff that she's implementing in the academy is very good as well.
And I suppose at the heart of any philosophy, Rhys, you need to have that core foundation. Listening to you recently on the Training Ground Guru conference was really illuminating and fascinating. You elaborated there upon the two main core tenets, perhaps, of your philosophy. Number one being a skill acquisition model, search, decide, and execute, and the second being that purposeful practice. What does that process look like for yourself?
Well, the search, decide, execute one, you kind of touched on in the last answer, really. So for those that might not have heard that Ground Guru, Training Ground Guru webinar recently, I was introduced to this probably during the last lockdown or the original lockdown, whenever we've had so many now, whenever it was. I was kind of tasked with having a little look at skill acquisition and trying to further my own learning on that, which I did, and came across a book called The Playmaker's Advantage. I always recommend that book because it was brilliant, and it continuously talks about the search, decide, execute kind of loop that players are constantly in during any game whatsoever. So you're constantly taking in information, whether that be through visually, whether it's what you can hear, whether it's just, you know, that at this moment in time you're in the 89th minute and you're 1-0 up, you're away from home, you're in the corner, don't cross it, perhaps keep it, come back out. Momentum in games, all this information you're constantly taking on, which will then inform your decisions. The best players tend to make the best decisions, and then once they've made those decisions, they've got the technique to be able to find that pass, or to be able to, whatever it is, finish, run, tackle, jump, whatever the decision is, whatever technical execution you want to do. So you're constantly in that cycle as a player. So that was, you know, something for me. Well, you can almost look at your learning then. If a player's not quite getting there on something, well, what is it? What in the game at that moment in time? Is it his decision making? He is taking in that information, decisions. So, or is it the technical side of things? So you can almost hone in on what it specifically is you're looking to develop to make that player a little bit better as well. And then that takes you basically to, like you say, purposeful practice. So once you kind of realize, or you're looking at improving whatever aspect of a young player's game or old player's game, designing sessions that are going to get that are going to create that moment or that picture over and over. You know, there's benefits in doing 11-11, don't get me wrong, absolutely there is, tactically, everything else. But if you really want to focus in on those moments, if you're working with a young group of midfielders, you've got a fantastic range of pass who sits at the base of your midfield. You've got one who's making fantastic at the time in third man runs, and you've got another who's I don't know, brilliant at receiving on the half turn to play forwards. Well, can I design a session that's going to expose strengths and expose these moments with these midfielders at the moment? Can I do it unopposed, and then can I build up a little bit of opposition within that, and then can I perhaps go into a phase, an attack for your defence, where it's very tight in the midfield, but the pitch is longer to encourage that run from deep? So can we get in behind, or an up back through with a striker? So a session design then gets that purposeful practice, and the more we do anything, the better we get at it. So if you're able to set up a session which gets 30 repetitions of that at the start of your session, and you go into your 11-11 and it comes out once or twice, well, brilliant, that you're reinforcing the learning then. So yeah, that's, you know, I've waffled on a little bit there, but something about it in a nutshell how I look at it.
No, it's very fascinating for me. What you spoke about youth development and coaching on the webinar was illuminating, really, that it's almost akin to whack-a-mole. you improve one thing, you focus on that area, and lo and behold, there's something else that needs to be addressed over the course of that 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, is that process for you, is it more about building players' strengths or improving weaknesses?
I think a player will make a career based on what his strengths are. So a manager will sign a player at the top level of the game because of what he can bring to his team, so his assets. So Manchester United having just signed Jadon Sancho because of his heading ability, and they're not about to try and develop that and play him next to Harry Maguire as centre half. They've signed him for what his strengths are. So I know that's a very obvious statement, but you will make a career based on what your strengths are. There is the time where you have to work on weaknesses, because at the same time, the best players will expose your weaknesses if you've got too many of them as well. So, and that's probably the art of coaching, isn't it? It's probably finding how you distribute your time on focusing on strengths, making them super strengths, making a player outstanding or world class that particular attribute, whilst also perhaps sometimes breaking it down and slowing things down and working on the technique of his weak foot pass. Because, you know, if I'm working with a centre half and playing out from the back at higher levels, he will get pressed and shown onto his weak foot. So if that happens and it's Kylian Mbappe that's pressing you and he's travelling at 10 metres per second to press you or whatever it is, you need to be good off your weak foot as well. So yeah, I think you have to strike a balance, but they'll make a career off what their strengths are. But if we can bring those weaknesses up a bit as well, then, you know, brilliant.
And I suppose at the end of the working day for you, Rhys, we've spoke about what it's like for you and the player being on the pitch. Off the pitch, how do you close that feedback loop with the player?
It's one of the best bits, mate. It's those relationships. It's the Champions League on a Tuesday night, and you see something happens that you've been working on with a player, and you send him that message straight away, or you pausing your TV and recording it quickly so you can send, you know, those type things. And I think that's how you get perhaps a little bit more from your players as well. When they know that you care, they really buy into what you're doing with them. So look, I'm sure I've probably sent a player a text or a message or something in the past, and he's kind of gone, oh, leave me alone. I'm sure it's happened. They haven't verbally said that to me, but I'm sure it has. But at the same time, deep down, they'll know, well, he's only sending that to me because he cares. You know, it's their career. They're the ones that are going to hopefully have the name up in lights and the bank balance with a few zeros in it come the end of the day. So, yeah, I think once they know how much you care and how much you want to develop them, then that really does build those relationships, and you can push them a bit more then as well. Because don't forget, these players need to be pushed at times, and if they know that you've got their interests at heart, well, perhaps you can push them that a little bit more as well. And the more you push them, perhaps you might just tip them into the next kind of level, or just enough to get that next move or that next contract, and so on and so forth. It's you don't have forever to become a footballer. You've probably got a sweet spot of a few years, haven't you? So it's very important.
Exactly, and I think it's all about igniting that inner child within the footballer. I mean, we can all remember when we were kids, Rhys, you know, watching our first international tournament, wall-to-wall football. Even somebody like your son now, who I'm pretty sure is immersed within the games. I mean, watching top-class players like Paul Pogba strut his stuff on the biggest of stages, Luka Modric, Pedri, that 360 vision. I suppose in your own mind now as a coach, there must be endless possibilities going off as to what you can actually coach these young players.
100%. It was funny the other night. I think it was the game where France went out the other night, and obviously with the ball, Pogba was outstanding. He scored that goal, didn't he? Top corner, it was brilliant. And I'd be talking to my young lad. He's only 7. Perhaps I should have left this out until he's a bit older. But I was talking to him about the importance of getting second balls when you're playing in midfield. And you know, Pogba was fantastic with a football, brilliant. And he was a bit slow on his heels, or he didn't react to drop on a second ball. And Ruben, my lad, said, "Oh, he could have got that second ball there, though, Dad, couldn't he?" And I was buzzing because I thought, oh, brilliant. You know, he's not just looking at the highlight reel stuff; he's looking at the stuff that's important as well. So, yeah, absolutely. And those kind of little nitty gritty details, I think, are important, because we all know, or we've all worked with players that are fantastically talented and express themselves with the football, but we also know a lot of these type of players where managers might not play them as much as perhaps they want to, because they might not quite trust them without the ball, might not trust them to be responsible at certain times and at certain moments. So I think it's important to teach young players the importance of that, because, you know, there is a point where it goes from being a game to a profession. There is that point. We should always ignite that enthusiasm of we all play the game because we love it. We fell in love with it when we were kids because we love playing it. We should always try and ignite that, whether the player is 15 or 35. But there is also an element where they need to understand that, it's a job now as well. So I expect you to take certain elements of your game and your development seriously. And I think we can help them as coaches. I don't think we should let them find out when they're 21 and they've perhaps just cost their team in front of a few thousand and the manager's now hammering them in the change room at half time. And that's how he learns. Well, let's tell him that's important at 15, 16, 17. Whether the penny drops or not, I don't know. But at least they've had the information a little bit sooner rather than learning when it's perhaps too late.
Yeah, and to be honest now, on a personal level, I'd be very much a proponent of guided discovery, designing sessions that speak to the players. But in terms of, you spoke earlier on, RHYS, you love your session designs. Would you ever, I suppose, integrate players and their feedback into the planning process, speaking with players over how can we design a drill that merits the 360 and scanning vision of the likes of a Modric or Busquets or a Pedri?
Yeah, 100%. And I think if they feel like they've got a little bit of input, they'll give you a little bit more in terms of buy-in as well. Again, it's probably down to your communication skills. If you feel as it be a certain way, can you kind of edge them towards that with your questioning and certain things like that, like you say. But yeah, absolutely. You want players to come to you and say, can you help me work on this? Or can we work on that? Or what do you think about this? Did you see something last night? Can I add that to my game? Or you want that from your players. What you don't want is the 1:30 in the afternoon wash bag under the arm. I'm off now. See you later. You want people who want to get better. You can always coach down from that and try and rein them in a little bit, but it's so much easier to kind of try and rein in over enthusiasm sometimes than to try and inject a bit of enthusiasm into someone who just does the bare minimum, I find. So yeah, definitely.
I suppose a follow-up then would be, traditionally a big question among coaches would be, whether to develop players organically, and foster that individual development, or develop players in relation to your game model. I suppose a better question nowadays, RHYS, would be, why not both?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So I know that's the briefest of answers. Yeah, I agree. I think I've spoken before, and I'm quite a big advocate of when we're trying to create these sessions and get these moments in games for our players in training, so that the game becomes easier. Well, if I've got a game model where I'm playing a right winger on the left, a right footer on the left and a left footer on the right, and they're going to be more inverted, well then why am I going to work with them getting down the outside and crossing in and the striker's movements based off that? Perhaps at the top level, I wouldn't necessarily work on that because we're not going to see that moment very much in our game, so it's wasted time. But at the same time, yeah, you also do want that adaptability and that flexibility as well. So, and it probably comes back to that conversation we had a moment ago where we're talking about, do we focus on strengths or do we look at the weaknesses? It's the art for you as the coach is then finding the balance of those things. But I do think at the top end, how would you want your team to play? What do you want the game to look like? That's where you've got to coach and that's where you've got to go and teach. And I think that you need to be quite clever in maximizing your time on the grass and in the video room in kind of training that and teaching that. But you do also want flexibility and problem solvers as well in the game, because if that's your game model but it's not quite working, we're not in the players' heads during the game. We can't tell them what to do. They can't hear you half the time if there's a crowd there and they're over the far side of the pitch. So you also want them to be able to problem solve as well. So yeah, sometimes designing sessions and just allowing them to work things out themselves is just as much development as it is something that's more prescribed.
Yeah, and I suppose naturally enough, the context I should have given behind that question, RHYS, was I spoke with Ryan Baldy last night about his new book, The Dream Factory, and he mentioned Colchester United's Academy Director, John D'Souza. And he mentions an epitaph from John where he speaks about that dawning realization. And he was like, how am I ever going to accommodate individual development when I'm so welded, so fixated on my game model, which at the time was a 4-3-3? I mean, how imperative is it for clubs and coaches to be asking the right questions? when it comes to focusing on the individual. We've seen good practitioners, the likes of your Liverpools, the likes of your Manchester Uniteds, for the past decade or so, focusing on the individual. But why is there such a gap, I suppose, between the elite, the top percentile, and the rest?
It's a tough question to answer that, but I do think that, I think it was Johan Cruyff that said it, if you improve the individual, well, you're improving the team anyway. If I can make a centre half better at heading it, the team's now better because they've got a better centre half in it that can head it a bit better. You know, about being fixated on your game model or your tactics, your style of play, there's still individual development within that. So, you know, I sometimes see formation doesn't win you games. It's the actions within the game that goes and wins you the game. So if I've got a fullback that doesn't close down the winger well enough to stop crosses coming into the box, he's still going to be a fullback in a 4-3-3 or a 3-5-2 or a 4-4-2 or 4-5, whatever it is. He's still a fullback. And if he doesn't have the detail on when to go, in terms of when to release and go and press the winger, what he does when he gets there, his body shape, the little nudges and the contacts and the arm across him, and matching the foot patterns, and when to kind of look to block the cross, not lunging, so then you get chopped and he comes back. And so those little bits and pieces, that for me is still individual development within your game model, because it's the individual detail and the individual tactic. So yeah, I still think you can certainly get it fixated on your game model or not. If you've got a midfielder who, if you're playing that 4-3-3 that you mentioned, and you're playing a 1 and a 2 perhaps, and you want that real midfielder really breaking lines, but he's not taking pictures quick enough to be able to do it off 1 touch or do it quickly in 2 touches, well then we'll work on him within that. And if he's able to start doing that, well then the 8 and the 10 can perhaps make the timing of their runs a little bit different, because they now have the confidence that he's going to receive and see them and play through the lines, or they can open up passing lanes to be able to play into strikers or whatever it is. So there is individual development within your team focus for me, regard whatever your game model, absolutely. And that's probably where you add in those little nuances and those little layers to the team. If the 8, to use that example, if your deep liar is now very good at knowing what's in front of him and looking to play forwards, if the 8 and the 10 move and open up a passing lane, but their defenders don't move, well then I want these 2 to now be very good at receiving on the back foot to then be able to drive forwards. If they do, the defensive midfielders do come with the 8 and the 10, it opens up that lane in there. I want the timing of their runs to be able to receive from the front off the striker to be good now, because that's what's the picture that's going to happen, or the moment that's going to happen. So and that's all within your game model. So, and that's individual development within your game model. And now if you've got them better at that, the centre half better at heading, the full back better at stopping crosses from the wide man, you're probably going to get a better team as well.
Exactly. And I think that's where we're all drawn to coaching, and specifically speaking on my behalf, youth development, because different players, different ages require different bits of information at different stages of their journey. And I suppose that's the beauty of the playmaker's advantage and that search, decide, execute model. You could be working on a variety of things, I suppose, when you're doing unit work or position-specific work with some of these players. But just to touch upon again, RHYS, the Training Ground Guru webinar, which was fantastic. And you compared working in individual development at the academy level to the first team. And you spoke about that gap between principle and game day against opposition at the first team level. Could you elaborate a bit more upon that?
Which gap was that? Sorry, it just
sorry, at the first team level, RHYS, you spoke about that gap between your playing principles of play, and game day against opposition.
Okay. I mean, first of all, I think in the first team environment, ultimately it's about winning. So that's what we need to do. Otherwise, people lose their jobs. Unfortunately, that is the harsh reality of football. In the academy environment, it's about development. So obviously they're the massive obvious differences between the two environments. And the way I always look at academy players is, if you've got an 18-year-old centre forward in the academy and a 28-year-old centre forward in the first team, if at the moment the first team players here and the academy players here, well this is your gap. If they're both leaving training after just doing their training session in the morning and they're out by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, well, the gap stays there. So this guy has to do more. He has to do more. There has to be a culture of wanting to do more, of wanting to learn more about extra work. You know, you won't, I don't think you should be told, oh, he's done too much distance this week, or unless it's ridiculously excessive, I don't think you should be told that in a development environment, because what I'm working on him to make him better. And actually the gap's starting to do that. If you start telling me that, oh, perhaps he's done a little bit too much on his feet or whatever, well, the gap will just stay there and he'll never get there and overtake this player. So that's obviously the massive difference between academy and first team. First team sometimes relentless. I've worked in the championship and it's Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday, Tuesday. If you're in the team for all of those games, your learning might be coming in the video room, because that the load is now important, because you're expected to be at 100% energy come the next game. Academy environment can be different. Sometimes why don't we make them a little bit fatigued by working with them? I'm not talking recklessly or too excessively, but we need to work with them to make them better. So let's do that. And then, do you know what? Do you know, if they do go into the next game a little bit tired, good, because you ask professional players, you know, how many games in your career, you've played 400 games, tell me how many of those 400 games you went into feeling 100% pristine, absolutely fantastic. And they won't say many. They won't. There'll always be an element of fatigue or a little knock where they've had to have that strapped up for this or that reason. So there's a mentality element involved in that as well, of your players perhaps being mentality robust enough to, right, we go again. And yeah, I'm feeling a little bit sore on my ankle, I got kicked a few days ago, but that doesn't mean that I can't go and press my opposite man properly. You know, I can't come in at half time and say, oh yeah, they scored, but you know, my ankle's a bit sore, so we'll get off the pitch then. Someone else can come on and play. And that's the harsh reality of how it is. So I think, yeah, the academy environment definitely has to be a culture of doing more. And then it comes back to the why. If the player understands what you're trying to teach them, what you're trying to help them with, how you're doing it, how it makes things better for them, what they'll get from it from being better, well, then you'll get that buy-in in doing the more as well. I'm not sure if that's answered your question perfectly.
I think it's given it context, RHYS, because I mean, from the sounds of it, if you weren't giving players those pictures, for example, or those lived experiences, you're not really doing your due diligence, are you, as a coach? I mean, you had one quote as well, which I'm going to refer to now. You know, players learn these things at 25. Why don't they learn and experience them at 15, 16? It's about creating those lived moments.
Well, you know, when you're 16, I think I'm right in saying this, you can play senior football. So if you're good enough, you're old enough. If you're at 16 better than the 26-year-old striker, the manager will play you because he wants to win the game. On the flip side, if you were to get an opportunity at 16 and you don't know a lot of these things, it might take you a little bit longer to get your next opportunity, because the manager will expect you to go away and perhaps learn that. And you know, sometimes you might not get many opportunities depending on who the manager is. So we have to help these players and give them the platform to go and perform and to go and get themselves a career. Like I say, if a first team manager's job is on the line, he might be reluctant to put a younger player in if he keeps making the same mistake 2 or 3 times. So we have to help them. We have to give them that information. They can't just go and find it out sometime. Well, they can, and lots have, but what's wrong with trying to help them and tell them that beforehand?
You know, yeah. And two, you look at, I suppose, the last 7 to 10 years, we've seen the most dominant clubs worldwide. They've had maybe just 1 or 2 different styles of play, and they've been hugely successful. Whereas now you look at the best teams, the best players, they're almost akin to a Swiss Army knife. I mean, having worked at the forefront and been at the heart of this development of young players over the past 6, 7 years, RHYS, what do you foresee the future player and the future game looking like in the coming 5 to 10 years?
Well, it's certainly got faster physically, hasn't it, over the last few years in terms of, you know, high intensity work. Not everyone is going to be a complete athlete though, so certainly that cognitive and that decision making side of things will be massive. I think Arsene Wenger has spoken about it recently, or quite a lot recently as well, about cognitive, you know, and decision making. All that element of the game is going to be what's next. So this is really what I'm talking about in terms of giving the information to these young players sooner. And sports technology is having more and more input into game sports. You know, data is. There's reams and reams of data now available on games and on training, so much, an incredible amount. I think it's important for you as a coach, again, comes back to your game model and what you want to look at. Well, let's, rather than slapping a report with all these numbers in front of the player, what 2 or 3 things are important to him in his position based on how we want to go and play? And perhaps utilising that information, because then that will help in their decision-making process. And then it helps in your session design to get them to see the pictures and experience and feel it. So then when Saturday comes, they're able to execute it a bit better. So I certainly think that side of the game, if you can think quicker, it's worth probably a couple of steps with your legs already.
Yeah, and I think, as we spoke earlier on at the start of this conversation, Rhys, you can't beat that human connection. And I suppose where I'm going with this one is that, you know, we sometimes tend to forget that ourselves as coaches, or even the players we're dealing with, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. You know, our brains are neuroplastic, we're learning, we're improving the whole time. If you're not individual led, nothing else will follow. If you don't have that rapport or that trust with the player, if you don't, you know, send that text message to that player watching Champions League on a Tuesday night, at the end of the day, that's what football's about. It's about those socio-affective relationships. I suppose, Rhys, having spoken about your journey to date, I mean, what's next?
It's a great question. I ask myself it a lot at the moment. My wife asks me even more than I ask myself. I don't know, to be totally honest with you. It was I loved my time at Sheffield United, really loved it there. Great place, good people, fantastic football club. My family is 200 miles away from there. So I've got a young family, a wife, I've got 2 young sons, and I just felt like I wasn't perhaps present for what was really important in my life, which is them, obviously. So I don't know, I'm open to whatever project. I don't have anything kind of concrete at this moment in time. I've enjoyed the last few weeks of being home. I certainly do want to get back in quickly, but I have enjoyed being home, particularly with the Euros being on as well. That's been great. So no, there's nothing concrete, but I'm very open to whatever happens, and hopefully something happens, you know, soon.
And I suppose to conclude, Rhys, I mean, what advice would you have for young coaches who aspire to go down this specific path?
Just the clues. There's clues every single game. There's clues in every single. So many resources out there now. So look at the best. What do they do? So if you're talking about individual development, you know, I did not play. I have not won a World Cup. I didn't play 500 times in the Premier League. So I don't talk from a position of experience in it, but I talk from a position of real, a lot of study. You know, and there's clues in the successes of others. How do the best centre forwards timing of their runs? Cavani's incredible. So when he kind of dips just behind the centre half to then get across the front of him, then the timing of when the winger puts his head down, and or if, you know, defenders are sometimes taught, you know, don't ever, I remember hearing Gary Neville say it, don't ever look at the man or the ball longer than 1 second, make sure you're constantly checking both. So as a centre forward, I'm saying, well, when he does look back at the winger about to cross it, that's your moment to go and make the movement, because you're out of his eye line in that second. So there's clues in all these little details in the game, and just look at the best and study it, get as much time on the grass as you can, experiment, but stay true to yourself, be yourself as well. So whatever you are as a person, bring that into your coaching style.
Rhys, it's been illuminating the past 30-40 minutes, learned a lot, took a lot away from the conversation. I suppose, where it's best for everybody to keep up to date with your current musings of the game of football?
Well, I'm on Twitter, RHYS 86, LinkedIn, I'm on there as well. I'm trying to break the habit of picking up my phone and scrolling too much at the moment, because we can waste a lot of time, I think, sometimes on social media. It's certainly something I'm trying to focus on. But no, I'm on there, and I do have time on my hands at the moment. I love talking football, so if anyone wanted to reach out, you know, absolutely feel free to, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I'd second that. Rhys, thanks a million for coming on. Top man.
I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.